Morning, everyone. Welcome to FPC Radio Live. It is the 8th, 2022, and we're waking up today to quite a bit of baseball news. Yeah, I know we do talk baseball here, especially when they force their hand on us, John, because we got a lot of news coming down. Obviously, the winter meetings on the heels of the winter meetings in Major League Baseball. Aaron Judge surprised a lot of people in returning to the New York Yankees, and who could blame him, when you have that short right field porch, to fire baseballs over. But one of the more surprising, maybe not so surprising tidbits of news came overnight with Xander Bogaerts, former Boston Red Sox shortstop, signing a massive 11-year deal with the San Diego Padres. And John, first I'll ask you about Aaron Judge because there was a rumor, or at least there was a report that he was on the cusp of signing with the New York Giants, and for about a couple hours, I think people believed it. But nonetheless, he decides to return to New York. And look, at the end of the day, he played this whole thing perfectly. He declined the first offer for the season, didn't negotiate, hit 62 home runs, upped his value, and got more money from the Yankees. And for a guy who's obviously been a Yankee his entire career, it's obviously comfortable for him to go back to New York. The big city, everything about the Yankees organization. And of course, like I said, the short right field porch there, John. So let me ask you, what's your reaction to Aaron Judge obviously returning to the Yankees? Sorry, Siri, I don't need to hear that. Apparently, she's chiming in. Don't want that. But I want to hear your opinion, John, about the whole Aaron Judge contract negotiation. What do you think? Who do you think's the winner out of all this, aside from Aaron Judge?
Yeah, obviously Aaron Judge, 9 years, $360 million, $40 million a year will take him till he's nearly 40 years old, which I think he'll be productive through his mid-30s, maybe in his late 30s. He's a really good defensive player as well, which I think gets lost in all of the equation. But he belongs to the New York Yankees. I don't want to make it sound like, it's anything like he owes it to the Yankees, but he kind of has followed up the Jeter model of, okay, he's the face of the franchise, he's homegrown. The fans love him, although he hasn't performed in the postseason.
Boy, is that some refreshing. I'm sorry, I'm just thinking about that based on what we're going to talk about here in a minute. And sorry, just go ahead.
No, he hasn't performed in the postseason, that's for sure. In fact, they were booing him at the end of the American League Championship Series against Houston. And you know what? He could have hit 700 in that series. They weren't beating Houston. But where Jeter, in his rookie year, won the World Series, right? And then just continued to win and win and win. So there's that little difference there. I thought that the Giants had a really good chance of signing him. They made an offer that was very comparable to what the Yankees offered him, and it just wasn't enough. They would have had to overpay for him. I think also Aaron Judge kind of looked at Yankee Stadium. Look, he hits home runs 500 feet, so he could be playing in Yellowstone National Park. He's going to hit a bunch of home runs, but where San Francisco plays is not a good hitter's park. It just isn't. It's still amazing that Barry Bonds hit 73 home runs 20 years ago, because it is not a good home run hitter's park. Exactly, and still not in the Hall of Fame. But I think Judge looked at it and said, well, if I want to make some sort of chase at maybe a single season record or 500, 600, 700 home runs, whatever, the best place for me is Yankee Stadium. The interesting thing with this stuff, Ian, is that when we start talking contracts, it now starts to get into state income tax.
Yeah.
There's no difference between New York and California. It's 14%. So 14% of that $360 million goes right to the state of New York, or would have gone to the state of California if he signed there. That's why you see some free agents who go to Texas or Florida where there's no state income tax. Just think of how much money they save. It's like they literally play for free for a year and a half if they go to New York or California. But it's not a surprise. The Yankees have the money, and they kind of needed to keep him because he is the face of the franchise, and he sells tickets, right? I mean, if he's the biggest star in baseball, I think you can make a case of that, right? I mean, it's 62 home runs. He's got a great smile. He's larger than life. So they had to sign him, and I think he was probably best served staying in New York.
Yeah, and look, I mean, the idea, everything about that philosophy, well, it's homegrown, all that stuff is something that, again, I wish the franchise down on Yawkey Way would consider, taking up that sort of philosophy when it comes to their homegrown players, because it's almost like the exact opposite. But yeah, look, I'm right there with you. The guy was going to cash in regardless, and if you're going to pick between, say, like you said, San Francisco or maybe even like San Diego, another notoriously bad hitters park, like,
Mhm.
well, might as well stay in New York, a place you're comfortable in. It's not like the weather factor, you know what I mean? Maybe in April, but like,
Mhm.
this isn't a weather issue. This isn't, oh, East Coast, West Coast. Yeah, to your point, the state income tax is the same. Although, when push comes to shove, I don't know, for a contract that big, I know obviously the numbers are, you know, huge, enormous when it comes to the state income tax, but I don't know if it matters a whole hell of a lot, as in terms of, you'd rather just go to the team that you think best suits you. And of course, staying with New York seems to have fit him pretty well. But the question is, and now the issue is, okay, the Yankees kept theirs, but if they come back with the same exact team as they did last year, I mean, I don't think anyone's looking, this isn't like, oh my God, the Yankees have just improved. No, they've maybe stayed the same. And that's kind of a problem long term because, I think they're going to regress in some other areas. Nice that they have Aaron Judge, but what's the game plan here moving forward? Because as it stands right now, do you think the Yankees are a legitimate threat? Something they haven't really been in over a decade.
I would say, I mean, they've made the playoffs quite often over the last decade, but they haven't played in a World Series since 2009 when they beat the Phillies. That was the last time they won a World Series and even played in one. So it's coming up on 13 years without a World Series appearance. They've lost the American League Championship Series. They've done that a few times over the last 5, 6 years to the Houston Astros, who, by the way, lost Justin Verlander. So that's a big hit for the Astros. But it seems like the Astros constantly have talent, and then I'm not sure if their farm system is outstanding or they'll trade for someone that maybe is a distressed asset on another team. They come to Houston, they play better. So no, Houston's still the team to beat the American League. Really have been for the last half dozen years. So the thing about that, Ian, is that the Yankees, more so than any other franchise in any sport, judge strictly by championships.
Yeah.
Like going to the playoffs is no big deal. That's expected. That's baseline, right? You're going to win your division, get to the playoffs, at least get to the American League Championship Series. And if you lose there, you're going to get booed. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what they're judged on is World Series. I mean, you can talk about the Patriots, the Cowboys, whatever. Pick any team in any sport. Nobody has the pressure that you have playing for the New York Yankees because that's all that matters. I mean, that they actually, will keep track of. Okay, the last time they played in the World Series and won it was 2009. And remember when Jeter got there? They hadn't been in a World Series since 1978. I mean, they've gone 18 years without playing in a World Series till Jeter showed up. And I'm not giving him all the credit, but it's kind of like the line of demarcation there, 1996. So yeah, and that's why Jeter's beloved by the Yankees. I mean, he's their Tom Brady, right? I mean, the guy just didn't know how to do anything but win. Where Judge hasn't been able to perform in the postseason, and a lot of times that happens with power hitters. You pitch around them, they go into a slump. 4 games later, you're swept. I mean, that's what's so strange about baseball is this endless season, 162
Mhm.
games, and then when you get to the postseason, it's like rush, rush, rush. It's 4 games, and maybe you're in a slump, you don't hit, and all of a sudden you're 1 for 17 in the American League Championship Series, and you're getting booed.
Yeah. And look, I mean, that's something that they're going to have to overcome now that the contract signed, and like you talk about that long gap from 78 to 96. Well, we're approaching that length of time now. We're just a couple seasons
Mm-hmm.
away from that repeating itself. So, to take ourselves back a generation, of watching the Yankees, when I first started watching baseball, to, morph into obviously what they became. They won the 4 World Series. But, before that, to your point, it was, big long stretch of time before they hadn't. Now, again, as a Red Sox fan, the gap, the gap and the lack of success at that time was just a tad bit more. So there wasn't really much to say. But obviously, fortunes have flipped since the early 2000s to now. Obviously, the Red Sox have won far more World Series. Although, again, their philosophy of building teams isn't. And I always compared it, when they were kind of running concurrently with the Patriots, that the Patriots are a great dynasty because they sustain success, and the Red Sox, uh, you know, 2013 was, I mean, an example of lightning in a bottle if there ever was one.
Mm-hmm.
That team, I don't think lost a single series the entire game. They didn't lose more than 2 games in a row. It was just from start to finish, just this magical run. And look, I mean, baseball's like that. You can do that, but they've never been a team that's able to handle success because often it's been followed up by almost immediate failure and at least some struggles there on out. The Patriots, on the other hand, obviously, you know, would lose Super Bowls or lose in the playoff game or whatever, and they'd be able to come back or win Super Bowls and they'd be right back there in the mix. The Red Sox weren't like that. So, you know, nonetheless, so they have had more success than the Yankees. The Yankees are obviously hoping that in the next 13 years or whatever, next 11 years with Aaron Judge, they at least get to one World Series, right? You would hope.
Oh yeah, no, they have to. And again, they should be able to. They're always in contention. You know, you get your pitching staff set up, and maybe Garrett Cole just blows through the postseason and is dominant, and Aaron Judge gets hot in the postseason and hits some big home runs, and you're on your way. I mean, it made it to the ALCS a couple of times over the last 6 years. It's just they can't break through Houston. But then again, who really can in the American League? Houston's been that dominant. Houston's been to the American League what the Patriots were to the AFC for 8 years, right?
Yeah.
Where it's just like, well, they're always going to show up. So that's going to always be the case. The strange thing about the Red Sox, the last 11 years, they've won 2 World Series, but they've also finished last in the American League East 4 times.
Yeah.
It almost feels like the New York Football Giants when
Yeah, pretty
they
much.
sprinkled in 2 Super Bowl titles with a lot of last place finishes, and really since their Super Bowl win over the Patriots in 2011, they've been in the postseason once.
Yeah.
Right, and they'll probably get back to this year, although it's teetering at this point. So yeah, I mean it's like feast or famine with the Red Sox, whereas the Patriots, even in their off season, they're right there.
Well, and look, I mean, you're not going to trade the World Series titles at all. I mean, obviously, given what an entire generation of Red Sox fans went through, not seeing something like that, to have four of them in the last 18 years is incredible. But we don't necessarily live too much in the past. We live in the current, and the current right now is I'm sensing a lot of frustration. Now, the Red Sox started out fairly active, I guess you want to call it, signing Kenley Jansen and the Japanese star, who apparently can hit baseballs like 600 feet. But again, we'll see how it translates. I mean, if he turns into Shohei Ohtani, I mean, I think the Red Sox will be all right. But
Big boy Andrew Benintendi.
yeah,
That's from things I'm reading.
yeah,
Seriously, I think that. And look, they had Andrew Benintendi and traded him for very little in return, so maybe they could have just kept him and not had to pay $105 million for the Red Sox. The Red Sox have this issue where they like a house, decide not to bid on it, and then they get a comparable house for way more money because they weren't quick to act when the other house was up. It's just like they did this with Xander Bogaerts, obviously, but we'll see what Yoshida is all about. Supposed to be the starting left fielder, maybe a leadoff hitter, doesn't strike out much, but sometimes I don't know how the skill set in Japan translates to Major League Baseball. Sometimes that's very difficult to understand.
Yeah, and it's tough. It's not any sort of. It's just we just haven't seen it yet. It doesn't necessarily always translate, and we've seen
Mm-hmm.
examples of that before in the past. But um, I don't know. It's still kind of with that fresh sting of the Mookie Betts debacle. Uh, the assets in return being, I don't know, less than.
Oh boy,
Yeah,
you're not kidding.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
like
I mean,
they tried to sell us on Verdugo and all these other guys, when the trade first happened. But it's like at the end of the day, you're losing a guy in Mookie Betts that he's a classic five-tool player. I mean, he can do it all over the field, and not to mention just face of the franchise type of player. You can say the same thing about Xander Bogaerts, and the same exact thing is happening. Only this time, John, they're not getting any assets in return. This was just he's signing, and that's it. Goodbye, and move on. And it's disappointing. It really is because fair or not, the perception of this ownership group has been that they don't necessarily really care about winning. They've got their World Series, and they're more than happy living off those. And how can we make the most money? I.e., how can we save money? How can we milk a few extra bucks out of consumers? And
Mhm.
maybe the Pittsburgh Penguins or whoever John Henry's focused on right this moment. I don't know. But right now, it doesn't seem like the Red Sox are the priority, or at least winning consistently and building a really great franchise. I don't think is a priority at all for this.
it's always problematic when the face of the franchise and the biggest attraction for that franchise happens to be the ballpark, and that's what it is. I mean, it's the biggest tourist attraction in Boston,
Well, they
without
can't keep their
question.
homegrown players long enough to have them be faces of the franchise.
That's right, yeah. And Bogaerts was the face of the franchise, and he was here for 10 years. And if you had given him the offer that you gave him apparently last night or the night before, which was 6 years, $160 million, you gave him that offer back in April, deal would have been done. And you would have had him. Again, their average annual value on their offer was actually higher than what the Padres ended up giving Bogaerts. 11 years, 280 is what San Diego gave him, which is a little more than 25 million a year. The Red Sox offered 160, which is about $26 million a year. But it was too late. I
But
mean, the
there
extra
was
5 years
also
means a lot.
and I mean that $200 million mark does too, because apparently about 4 teams were willing to break that $200 million barrier with
Yep.
Bogaerts, and again, I mean that's that those type of numbers seem like astronomical to us, obviously,
Yeah.
but in the current landscape of Major League Baseball, that's the going rate. So again,
Yep.
it seems like the Red Sox came in and said, "Hey, it doesn't. We can do whatever we want. We can lowball the guy and just go from there." And it's like this is the reputation you're building, or have built as a ownership group or as management group or whatever. Whoever's to blame for this. I'd like to. I imagine a lot of influence comes from ownership and how much money to spend and whatever. But if you're Xander looking at it like, wow, the Padres, the Giants, or the Yankees, or whoever, I don't know exactly who the other teams were that offered him. Those teams are willing to go over $200 million. Now, not everyone, I'm sure, is going to do the 11-year deal, but 7 years, 200 million, that type of thing, that blows the Red Sox offers out of the water. And
Right.
and not only just on monetary value, but just on part, like if you're Xander Bogaerts, you're like, I played for this franchise for 10 years, and this is what they're valuing me at when
Mm-hmm.
it's clearly undervalued. So um, it's just it's not a good feeling if you're a Red Sox fan, but it's something that's very familiar at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's so similar to what happened with John Lester back in 2014, where you offered him 5
Oh
years,
yeah,
$75 million, which at that point was an insulting offer. At least they had the good sense to trade him at the trade deadline, get Cespedes from Oakland, and then they flipped that into Rick Porcello, who was a nice pitcher for the Red Sox, did win an American League Cy Young Award. So at least they got some value back for John Lester. In the case of Xander Bogaerts, they're getting nothing back in return. And look, you detailed what they got in return for Mookie Betts, who is one of the top 5 players in the sport, was the face of the franchise, just a really good guy as well. I mean, I've talked to people in the medical industry in the city. He still does stuff for kids, and he's no longer a Boston Red Sox. He's that good of a guy. And Bogaerts is the same way. They're really both model citizens. I mean, you pay a little bit extra for that, right? Like, you're not going to wake up one
homegrown
day and find
guys.
a homegrown guys. You're not going to wake up one day and hear that Xander Bogaerts did something stupid. Like, he's there. I know, everybody loves Patrice Bergeron. He's their Bergeron, or he was their Bergeron, right? Like the guy that, when the team lost a tough game, who was the one guy who faced the music? It was Xander Bogaerts, and he handled it perfectly, almost like an NFL quarterback, like the guy you can look at and go, we're in good shape because that dude, he understands it, he gets it, and now he's gone, and yeah, and you get nothing back in return. So you lost Bogaerts and Mookie Betts, and in return you got Alex Verdugo, who is to me a mediocre, average outfielder. You got Connor Wong, who is a third string catcher, and you got Jeter Downs, who's still playing in Worcester. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And now you got Rafael Devers, who has 1 year left in his contract. Look, if you're going to go all rebuild and go through the farm system, trade Devers now. Like,
Yeah.
what are you going to have him this year hit, 320 with 42 home runs, and at the end of the year he goes signs with, I don't know, the Padres, who apparently sign everybody for $300 million, and you get nothing in return. Trade him now. Just go sink all the way to the bottom, get as much as you can for Devers, and say, well, our farm system is built up, and we're gonna start from scratch. Go ahead and do that. That makes more sense than just lying to the fans and saying, well, we're right in there, and then you're $120 million off from
Yeah.
the final offer that he signed with San Diego. And by the way, where's San Diego getting all this money? Like, that's not a wealthy franchise.
No.
They're like, is somebody like, is a Russian oligarch own the Padres and just like trying to hide money? Because it's not a huge market in San Diego. I mean, they do quite well for themselves, but their payroll is about what they bring in, which you can't run a business like that because there's other expenses.
Well, I think
But good for
they're
them.
trying. They're probably trying to capitalize on their recent success and trying to
Yeah.
turn that into some sustainable long-term growth economically. Because you think about it, aside from the state taxes, San Diego. I mean, it's sunny and 70 degrees all year round. I mean, it's a beautiful place to live. The beaches, the sun, the people, everything about it. So it should be desirable, especially for a baseball player. You know what I mean? Because
Mhm.
you spend your summers and obviously in season playing out of San Diego, but then you get to spend the off season in San Diego, which is probably the best time of the year to spend in San Diego. So the appeal is certainly there from an aesthetics standpoint, and the team's starting to play very well and be a contender. So again, I think maybe it's a little bit of a gamble saying, hey, we're going to swing for the fences, pun intended, and kind of just go for it. But I don't know. It's again, if you're a Yankees fan, you're probably waking up today pretty happy. If you're a Red Sox fan, you have mixed emotions based on their activity from yesterday, but it certainly shouldn't be surprising. However, we'll shift gears a little bit here because as much as it's doom and gloom for the Red Sox, all you got to do is turn the channel to either of the winter teams, and you'll be just immediate rush of adrenaline and emotion and positivity. Because I honestly, I can't tell you, John, which team, and I'm talking about the Boston Celtics and the Boston Bruins, is better in their respective sport. I don't know. I have no idea. Like I sit there and I watch the Celtics just absolutely demolish the Suns last night, up at one point 43 points or whatever it was, their the biggest gap. And I'm like, wow, they're great. I don't know if they're better than the Bruins in the NHL. And then I look over and I'm watching the Bruins game and I'm like, wow, they're up 4-0 on the defending Stanley Cup champions. But I don't know if they're better than the Celtics in the NBA. So John, this is a great question to ask for any fan of Boston sports, but who's better in their respective sport? The Bruins or the Celtics?
Maybe I can change the question just a little bit, Ian, if you let me.
No, I want you to answer this because I've been trying to figure it out for the last
That is a
24
good
hours.
question. That's like trying to find the meaning of life, right? Because they're clearly the two best teams in their sports. Although somehow the New Jersey Devils have almost the same record as the Bruins, right?
They've been phenomenal too as well. But
is Brodeur back playing?
Yeah.
I mean, is he, at 55 years old, back in net and doing what he always did? Yeah, because New Jersey's what 21-4-1, and the Bruins are 21-3-1.
Yeah,
crazy.
They're tied. They have the same number of points, 43. New Jersey's just actually played just one more game, so technically the Bruins are percentage wise the best team in the league. But it's it's very rare you're going to have the start and then have another team breathing down your neck. But so far, those two teams are probably neck and neck. And in that case, John, I guess the question might answer itself because I don't think there's any team in the NBA that's even. I mean, Milwaukee, obviously, I think is a great team, and I think we look at the East and say, well, it's probably the Celtics, Milwaukee, or Celtics, Bucks, and everyone else at this moment. With Cleveland, probably a close third, but a bit of a separation from the rest. So maybe that answers the question. But the reality of it is, I mean, both teams are not only winning, but they're dominating. The Bruins plus minus goal differential is plus I think 44 through 25 games. The next closest, well, aside from New Jersey I think might be in the 30s. But outside of that, you're talking plus 17, 18. That's pretty much where the rest of the league's at. So they've almost doubled the goal differential of everyone else in the league. On the flip side, you look at the Celtics, and they're essentially doing the same thing in terms of point differential. It's absurd, John. It's absurd.
Plus 44 goal differential is good for an entire season.
Yeah.
I mean, that would lead you to believe that that's a top 5 team, right? I mean, that's essentially a half a goal a game. You do that over an 82-game schedule, you're going to pile up a lot of points. The Celtics offense is right now the most efficient offense in the history of the sport. Like, I mean, it's a third of the way through the season, so we'll see how that goes. But, I mean, they're shooting nearly 40% from three, which is insane. I don't know if they can sustain that. This is a team that is leading the league in field goal percentage, three-point percentage, and free throw percentage. So there's like, it seems like they've got a bunch of guys who are essentially like Steph Curry, like 50, 40, 90 guys,
Yeah.
which is a rarity in the NBA. And the team's not that far off of that. They're like 85% from the free throw line, like high 40s from the field, and close to 40% from three. It's insane. And then when they need to, they can go play defense. They had a win a couple of days ago that I thought was their most impressive win when they went to Brooklyn and won,
Mm-hmm.
because their offense was garbage that night, but they still found a way to win comfortably over a team that's playing pretty good basketball. Yeah, I would say the Celtics only because we know how tough it is to win a Stanley Cup. Not the grind, but the randomness of it.
Yeah.
Like you run into some hot goaltender in the first round, and all of a sudden the puck doesn't bounce your way, and you get to game seven and overtime, and the puck goes off of someone's skate, and you lose. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the Bruins won cups in 1970 and 1972, but their best team was the 70-71 team, which lost in the first round to the Canadiens. That team was a wagon. That's the greatest Bruins team ever. It's kind of like the '07 Patriots, regular season, greatest team ever, but, didn't win the championship, so you can't compare it to other teams that did win championships, but they lost in the first round to the Canadiens. Game 7 at the old Boston Garden. Ken Dryden just wouldn't allow the Bruins to score against them, and I was, 8 years old at the time and cried like a baby.
Well, several members of that team would agree with you, and they've said
Yeah.
it. We've actually heard it, and I've actually heard it on a show that I've done before, where they've talked about
Nice.
Johnny Busick was very saying like, hey, that 1971 team was bad. And look, that's that's fine. And like I said, with the Bruins, like they could win 70 games this year. But if they see the Montreal Canadiens in the first round, I am not sleeping well over the course of those 7 days or whatever it takes to play that series, because it is. And hockey can be a thing where in basketball, generally, if you're the best team, you're going to likely win. And it's not guaranteed every year. It's not 100%, but over the course of a 7-game series, it's hard to overachieve in a series against a great team. And I think the Celtics are setting themselves up to, again, a collision course with the Bucks. Right now, the depth scoring on the Celtics, and you can say the same thing about the Bruins. It's just, I mean, they are so deep. That's their biggest advantage. And at this point, we're not talking about a small sample size. Like, yeah, it is only a third of this way through the season, but we're not talking about the first 10 games anymore. You know what I mean? Where it's like, okay, yeah, like once upon a time we saw the Buffalo Sabres get off to a 12-1 start and then probably win one game like over the course of the next 2 months. But we all expected that. Same in basketball. It's like, okay, yeah, any team can kind of get off to a little hot early start. It's more or less, what are you going to do to sustain it? And right now, there's really not too many flaws in their game that you can point to. And it's looking more and more like, and we asked this question probably immediately after the NBA Finals were over. Like, what is the Celtics team going to do? Are they going to turtle and go away? Which we've seen happen for teams that go and lose at a championship series. Sometimes that's a little bit too much to bear. Or are they going to go on this tour de force, so to speak, and get to the level that they expected to get to last year? And that's kind of what we're getting right now. This is a team that has taken that loss in the finals very personally, and I think used that frustration in a positive way, because right now they're playing lights out. And it's hard to, like I said, it's hard to pinpoint how many more losses they can possibly sustain. I mean, especially in a game like basketball, like you can project a little bit like this in basketball. Um, this team, again, it's certainly capable. If they play this way the rest of the year, they're certainly capable of winning 70 games. Whether or not they do it, I don't know. But they're deep, and they haven't even got Robert Williams back.
Yeah, and as you talked about the depth, I mean, Malcolm Brogdon, they stole him from the Pacers. I mean, sensational player. I mean, if you had Malcolm Brogdon in the finals last year, you'd probably beat Golden State, because that's exactly what they needed, because they really only have two guys that can create their own shot. That's Tatum and Brown. Well, Brogdon's now a third guy that can do that, so that really makes their offense that much better. They lost the finals last year because of their offense, not because of the defense. Defense was pretty good against Golden State.
Well,
Held them to 104 points per game.
literally, it was just about on the mark, not just an average. That was literally like Golden State was consistently scoring,
Yes.
like in between 100 and 110 points, and
Yep.
which is fine for Golden State because I mean, if you're holding Golden State to barely over 100, you're usually feeling pretty good about your chances because of who they
Mm-hmm.
are. But yeah, and on top of that, I mean, Jaylen Brown, I think he's. I mean, Tatum, he's elevated his game, but Jaylen Brown seems like he's really just taken on a whole nother level of play at this point. And again, you watch more, you have more of an eye for the game than I do. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like Jaylen Brown has upped his game a level, which
Mm-hmm.
is incredible because he was a really good player last year, obviously.
Absolutely, and he's a guy who's improved every year, as Tatum has as well. They go in the lab in the off season and say, okay, this is what we need to do. They've got to cut back the turnovers because that was a killer in the finals, and they still at times will have those. But look, it's an 82 game schedule. You're going to have some moments, but when you look down last night, and I was talking to a Celtics fan earlier, and Celtics won handily, and not that they were disappointed that Tatum and Brown only scored 25 points each, but that's almost like an off night for those two guys, which is scary because you could get 60 points a game between them on a regular basis. That's essentially what their average is. One guy's averaging nearly 31, the other one's averaging 27. Add it up, 58 points per game from two guys, and this is with a lot of blowouts. So,
Yeah.
and I'm hoping Joe Mazzulla does a little better job of scaling back the minutes a bit because that's my biggest fear that these guys might wear down as the season goes on. Give them some breaks, limit them to maybe 29, 30 minutes in a blowout type situation. I think that will save you as well. But yeah, I mean, look, Ian, they've lost 5 games this year, right? And we're 2 months into the season. 3 of those losses came in overtime, 2 to Cleveland and 1 to Miami. So, I mean, if they use the point system in the NHL, they'd be, 21, 2, and 3, which would be really good.
Yeah.
So that's, and again,
don't
my sleeper pick in the East still remains Cleveland. I think it's the Celtics, Milwaukee, Cleveland. I mean, I think by the end of the year, you might make a case that the 3 best teams in basketball are on the Eastern Conference. I'm really high on Cleveland because they've got elite perimeter scoring and 2 really good bigs who are very versatile. So I think, the perfect setup would be Celtics have the best record in the East, Milwaukee and Cleveland beat the hell out of each other in the second round, and the Celtics are waiting for the winner of that series, and we'll have that advantage, home court advantage. I mean, if you said put $100 on who you think is going to win the NBA championship right now, it's the Boston Celtics, and I'm not a green teamer, you know that.
No, of course not.
But I just think that right now they're just doing everything right. They just have so many ways to beat you, and when they need to, they can play on the defensive end. And like you pointed out a few minutes ago, this is all without Rob Williams, who is their best defensive player. I know Marcus Smart's the defensive player of the year. Rob Williams is such a unique player. Man, when they get him back, anything is possible.
Imagine if they also had Gallinari in this mix too.
Oh, that would warm my heart. That would warm my heart.
I know you're Paisan,
right? I mean, come on.
I mean, Jesus, they'd be averaging 145 points a night. It seems like.
Oh, I missed him.
Yeah. Their score differentials will be like a your blood pressure reading that you need, like 120 over 80 every night. So, anyways, all right, we got a couple more minutes here, so I do want to touch on the NFL real quick because the news out of Buffalo obviously is a lot worse than what they initially expected with Von Miller. He is now done for the season, and I know, John, that there were Kansas City Chiefs fans that were celebrating, thinking, "Oh, this is over for Buffalo." Let me remind them that they needed a miracle 13-second, i.e., a big catch and run from Tyreek Hill to beat the Buffalo Bills last year, and I still think Buffalo is better this year. Without, what I mean, like they were obviously better with Von Miller, but I think they're still better than what they were last year without Von Miller because I think they're getting really good defensive line play from guys like Shaq Lawson across the board. But it's disappointing, sure. And this is a guy that you're likely going to miss in those big Super Bowl or big playoff moments, and that's the big key thing for me when it comes to the Von Miller injury because I don't think it necessarily affects them in the regular season. I still think the Bills are going to end up with the number 1 seed just because the amount of time we have left and kind of they've righted the ship. They've been playing the last couple of weeks without Von Miller. and I think their schedule, I think that they can win out and possibly lock up that number one seed. However, I think the time they're going to miss Von Miller or wish they had Von Miller is in the playoffs at some point because he just
Hmm.
has a knack for coming up with those big plays in those big moments. And that's something that I'm not saying that the Bills aren't capable of finding. I mean, they certainly are. Like, I'm not going to be surprised if they go to the Super Bowl. It'll just be more impressive without Von Miller because he was such a key piece. But uh, I don't know. Like I said, I gotta see how it plays out. I'm not writing off. Like I said, some Chiefs fans are ready to just be like, oh, no, no, who cares about the Bills? I mean, no, I mean, I think the Bills are still a really, really, really good team. I mean, let's not write off Cincinnati. I mean, that's a team we've started to really obviously pay attention to the last few weeks. Um, but certainly in a race that includes the Chiefs, the Bengals, and the Bills, losing a guy like Von Miller is that's a tough pill to swallow. It's not the end of the world, but it's certainly not a great situation.
You know, one way to look at it too, Ian, is okay. You're not going to have Von Miller, who I think you can make a case that if you take Brady and Rodgers out of the equation, and I'm talking about like all-time great accomplishments, take those two veteran quarterbacks out of the equation, you can make a case that Von Miller is the most accomplished player in the NFL, right? Taking
Sure.
those two guys off. I mean, I know that Aaron Donald won two or three NFL Defensive Player of the Years. I mean, Von Miller could have very easily been MVP of the Super Bowl last year,
Yeah.
and he already was MVP of a Super Bowl 6 years ago. I mean, I think that highly of that guy. I think he is, the closest thing I've seen to Lawrence Taylor. He's not Lawrence Taylor, no one is, but he's the closest thing that we've seen to Lawrence Taylor. So yeah, missing him is going to be a big hit against Buffalo. But here's the other thing. Let's not forget last year in the playoffs, they didn't have Tre'Davious White, their great
Yeah.
cornerback. Well, he's back.
Yeah.
So, and the Kansas City Chiefs don't have Tyreek Hill. So, they've lost their most explosive weapon. Buffalo's going to have back their, or already has back their best cornerback. That's pretty good. And I think, again, you know, Buffalo's not intimidated by Kansas City. They
No.
beat them in the regular season back-to-back years and had that playoff game won last year. Just got to, button it up a little bit better. And certainly Cincinnati's not intimidated by Kansas City. Hell, with Joe Burrow, they're 3-0 against the Chiefs. So, yeah, the Chiefs fans are they're quite an interesting lot, to say the least. I know
Delusional.
you get into it a lot. Very delusional. Yeah, exactly.
Well,
Get that,
let's think of it. Let's think of it real quick this way. For a team that's supposedly so dominant and has run the AFC,
Mhm.
they're 0 they've struggled against their closest competitors. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say, "Oh, they only won because they played the Texans and the Browns or whatever." Although, again, they played the Texans and the Browns. They're 0-3 against the Bengals. They're again, like you said, the Bills aren't afraid of the Chiefs. They're not intimidated by them. And yes, have they got the advantage in the playoffs? Yes, but that first matchup, we talked about it a little bit the other day. The Bills just weren't there yet. They were
Mhm.
just kind of coming into their own. They weren't quite to that level. Let's go back not too long ago where when Patrick Mahomes took over this Kansas City Chiefs team. They're coming off an 11-5 season, divisional win, a divisional championship, and again, this was a team that was a perennial playoff contender with Alex Smith. So this was a team
Mhm.
that was far more ready to compete right away and give credit where credit's due. Mahomes took him to that next level. Um, but to pretend like this team hasn't struggled against, I mean, better teams in the league, it's kind of weird, John, if you think about it. Like for a team that seems so dominant, I mean, everything you look at for the Chiefs, I mean, dominant. Oh, they've won X amount of games. They've won now going on 5 straight AFC West, 6 straight AFC West titles.
Mhm.
They haven't lost in November or December. But you look at their competition against the best of the best. They couldn't beat Brady and the Patriots until obviously their run was over. And they didn't have to go through the Patriots in order to win their Super Bowl. The Bengals weren't around until recently, and recently they might have a better quarterback if push comes to shove
Mhm.
because the things we value in quarterback play, I think Joe Burrow has just endless amounts of that in him in terms of pocket presence, awareness, and ability to read and dissect defenses. Something that I don't. I'm not saying Mahomes can't do. I just don't think he's as good at it. Like I said, these are the things I value personally. So, uh, but you struggle against the Bengals. you struggle. I don't want to say struggle. You're competitive and not dominant against the Bills. So far, you're talking about two teams that's your closest competition. Now, John, let's go back in time a little bit to the Patriots run in the AFC with the Steelers and the Colts. They dominated both of those teams. Now, the playoffs again with the Colts was obviously a little bit different, but the Steelers were, along with the Ravens, maybe the third best team in the AFC in that era. I mean, a
Mhm.
very, very dominant team, and they got demolished week in, week out. Whenever they played the Patriots, there was just no competition. The Chiefs haven't done that to their AFC rivals. They haven't been able to. So it's kind of a very weird thing where it's like, yes, they've been very dominant, but when you look under the surface against really good teams, not so much. Not so much. And this is the problem, and this is the issue with people saying, "Oh, well, they're on pace to do this. They're on pace to do that." I'm like, how can you say that? How can you say that? I mean, they're not going to face the Cleveland Browns every year in the AFC Championship game. You know what I mean? They're not going to face Bill O'Brien, and the Texans with a 24, down 24-0 and just get given a terrible uh, decision to punt or fake punt from your own end zone. I don't know. I don't want to relive that. It's only going to make me stressed. But to me, I
Your
look
next
at it.
your next Patriots head coach, Bill O'Brien.
Yeah, don't don't don't
Well,
don't do that. Come on now.
better than Matt
That's
Patricia. So I mean, I don't know. I
you know
maybe
what?
you know what? The next guy I want is Gerard Mayo, but I think they may go out. I don't know what they'll do, but
Yeah, well,
that's another discussion. But I get your point. The thing is, I think when you look at it though, Ian, maybe when the Chiefs face a quarterback comparable to Patrick Mahomes, like as good as Patrick Mahomes, that this is what happens. You lose as much as you win, or in the case of the Cincinnati Bengals, you lose all the time because there's no question the three best quarterbacks in the AFC right now are Mahomes, Burrow, Allen. I mean, I'm not a huge Justin Herbert fan, but he just hasn't done it yet, and I think he's held back a little bit by that coaching
yeah,
staff
and
and the
he's
fact that
he's regressed a bit this year. And
he's
I was I
regressed a
was I
little
was a
bit.
big
Yeah.
fan of his, and it just
Yep.
disappointing season. But again, see what happens in the future. But
Yeah, I mean, he lost his left tackle. His receivers really haven't played much. It's kind of a weird organization. They're very cheap, and I don't know. It's a strange place. But I think he could get to that level if, again, those guys have pretty good support systems. I think Burrow's overcome more than anyone. Right?
oh
Because
yeah,
let's not forget when, like you said, Holmes was drafted into a very good organization that was winning and won the division the year before he started. And Buffalo, the year before Josh Allen was drafted, made the playoffs. I mean, they weren't a great playoff team with Tyrod Taylor, but hell, they qualified at 9-7. They were building something. Burrow went to a place that was just a disaster, and he's kind of turned things around. So those three guys are the three best quarterbacks. So yeah, when they kind of play each other, it's almost like a round robin, right? Maybe sometimes you beat them, they beat you, and but hey, he's 0-3 against Burrow, and two of the last three times Buffalo's played Kansas City. With all those games being in Kansas City, the Bills are 2-1,
yeah.
and the one loss came in that ridiculous playoff game last year where they just screwed up the ending in regulation.
And that's the other thing too is they're not that formidable at home, and that's usually the mark of a great like
Mm-hmm.
the Patriots just never lost at home. You go into Gillette Stadium,
Except
you're
for
not.
Baltimore. Baltimore was
Yeah,
the one
except
team that never
yeah,
feared coming in. Yeah.
which was always kind of like okay, just fortunately they didn't have to play Baltimore that often. Although again, they were able to overcome that Baltimore. Obviously go
Mm-hmm.
back to 2014, the 2-14 deficits, but for almost 20 years, you just did not go into Foxborough and win. Plenty of teams have gone into Kansas City and won.
Yep.
And in big games too. So that that formidable home field advantage doesn't exist. The domination, yes, that does exist on paper, but like I said, when you scratch the surface a little bit and peel back a couple layers, it's like, okay, who have they dominated against? Well, you look at some of the best teams in the AFC at the time that they're doing their run. Again, the Bengals, the Bills, the Patriots at the beginning of it, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they've had very little success against those three teams collectively. And
Yep.
again, that's when you're looking at this and saying this is why you cannot project X amount of Super Bowls or this, that, and the other. They're going to run the table, blah, 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 blah. Because right now, like I said, I'm hypercritical of them. So be it. It's my lot in life. I gotta do this. I gotta balance things out, John. I'm all about balance. So
Share and balance.
yeah, care and balance. I'm hypercritical. Um, these are the things that you sit there and you're like, wow, it's actually kind of surprising considering how great they have been over the last 4 or 5 years. So, all right, that's gonna do it for us here today. We've gone a little bit over our time, but that's okay. That's fine with me. I can live with that. But we will be back tomorrow, Friday, to really break down the rest of the weekend and give our picks for the week. The Raiders are playing tonight. You care? The Rams? No.
Was Baker Mayfield playing
Oh,
quarterback? I mean,
maybe,
yeah,
maybe. Okay, maybe I'll tune in for that for about 5 minutes. Other than that, I
yeah.
couldn't really care less. So, all right, guys and girls, thank you very much for listening, and we will talk to you